Welcome to the Radically Embody Love Podcast with Jessica Falcon and co-host Nazrin Barbik. We have a very special guest today, Maia Toll, who I'm so honored to have. She just released her newest book. I don't know if you're on YouTube, you can see it, Letting Magic In. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous cover. And she's here to talk all about magic. She's the co-owner of Herbiary, a beautiful store in Philadelphia and Asheville, North Carolina. She's written 5 other books, I believe, The Night School and Herbiary and Bestiary. And was it Crystallary? Am I getting the name right?
Yeah. And the Wild Wisdom Companion.
And the
That's
Wild
the only
Wisdom
one you're
Companion.
missing.
Yeah.
That poor little book. Some people say it's the best book, and it just always kind of gets forgotten. It was actually, the original title was The Wild Wisdom Almanac, and my publisher changed it, and I'm like, oh, you killed it, you guys. You just killed it.
Well, what about this title, like All About Magic? I'm curious. Let's talk about what magic is before we go deeper into the book itself, because I think we might all have a different understanding of magic. What is it? How do you define it?
You know, for me, magic is working with the unseen, usually energy, like just where things land in our body, in our souls, in our hearts, instead of in our brains. We're very intellectually focused as humans. And so being able to perceive with other parts of our being, I think, is how we let the magic in.
And in order to perceive with other parts of our being, we have to be in the other parts of our being, meaning be in the body and be in the heart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to be able to see the world, not just through the lens of our mind. And that can take some training, that can take some rewiring of your being to be able to do that. But we've all had those moments. The example that I like to use is there was one evening I was driving home from work when I lived in the Hudson Valley, and the Hudson River was in front of me, and I was kind of coming over the mountain, and the sun was setting over the river. And I just had that sense of like, that expansion of your heart and your whole being. I came out of kind of the dark shadow of the mountain, crested the mountain, and there was the sun just like glistening on the water. And I could feel it in my whole body. And we've all had those moments where we feel something, we feel the landscape, we feel a moment. And so teaching ourselves to recall those feelings, to live in those feelings more, to be able to sense not just through our mind, but through that physical expansion, that feeling of like, wow, the world is truly wondrous. And, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw my eyes like go out the window because I live on the side of a mountain and the trees just slope down. And all I have to do is look out the window to remember that the world is truly wondrous.
Because nature itself is so magical. I mean, it's, I know that's one of the things you're passionate about talking about is just this, when it's something we can so easily take for granted. And particularly if we are walking through the world head up, we're not in the receptive stance of taking in the world around us.
Yeah, so true. And I think that if we had more of not just a mental construct of the natural world, but that deep awe, that ability to feel awe from the natural world, I think that would shift so many of our larger cultural conversations around climate change, around destruction of old growth forests, around oil drilling. We would be much more open to coming up with holistic solutions if we were walking around feeling that sense of awe for the world that we live in, the one that we were gifted, not the one we've created. We've created some pretty amazing things. Like whenever I feel despair about humanity, I look at what we've created. We're ingenious in our creations. But the world was pretty friggin' amazing before we did a dang thing.
It's like going back to the roots, right, of that original primal connection to the world around us, not as something separate, but as something that we're a part of, that we belong to, which is the opposite, I think, of what we're taught, growing up, that so many people struggle with feeling like they belong. And I think it's in part, I know for me, part of my process of coming into myself was beginning to re-belong to the earth. And I'm curious if you always felt that connection to the earth, or if that's also something that you came into feeling and belonging with.
So I always felt a connection to animals. I was a horseback rider at a very young age. So I had that kind of connection to something outside of humanity. But the sense of being connected to the earth itself, to kind of the more of the entirety of the earth, to feeling like I was a thread in the larger fabric of this weaving that is all of us and everything, that came much later. Like that was something I had to go through a process of unlearning and relearning to begin to feel that sense of connection. But it was something I was always searching for. I read E.M. Forster as a teenager, and the epitaph on, or the epigraph, writing graph, right? The epigraph on Howard's End is only connect. And I've carried that forward with me through the decades, this, idea of searching for connection. And if we can only connect, then something different can happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that process of like becoming and unbecoming that you talked about, I know that that's actually a memoir of becoming. And so I'm curious if you could talk about it. I haven't had a chance to read the entire book yet because you just released it 2 days ago, on June 27th. This will come out a little later, but June 27th it came out. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that becoming process, the unbecoming, becoming process for yourself, and what that looks like overall.
Well, for me personally, I don't know that I can speak to it overall.
I mean, overall for you. Yeah. Because instead of going into all the stories that everybody can read, like overall for you, what that has been, like if there's a theme or.
Yeah. So I think for me, the interesting thing about becoming something new and someone new, kind of going through that initiatory process. In our culture, we tend to think that if we are going to become something, we have to really hardcore do. We have to achieve, we have to strive and kind of expand. And what I have found over and over again for myself is that in order to go through an initiation into the next stage, I actually have to let go. I have to release. I have to unwind. That the process always begins with shedding off whatever is not right for this next step. Mm-hmm. And so I really first began to grasp at that lesson during the time period that I write about in Letting Magic In. It had happened at other times before, but I hadn't understood it. And so at past times in my life, when I went through these kind of initiatory moments where I was leaving one part of my life and stepping into the next, I really resisted. I fought. I tried to inhibit the growth and the change because it didn't feel like growth. It felt like loss. And during the time period in this book is when I realized, like, oh, that loss of things, identity, control, all of those losses allow you to become something else. I've always been fascinated with butterflies. When they go into the cocoon, I would think, if I was just thinking about it, with, in goes the caterpillar, out comes the butterfly, that like that little caterpillar goes in and it hangs out in there and it grows its wings. But that's not what happens. If you cut open a cocoon, what's inside is DNA soup. The caterpillar completely goes to mush. And then it comes out as the butterfly, rebuilt from that DNA soup. And we need to go through a similar process. We need to let ourselves go to DNA soup in order to become the next thing. And it goes against like every ingrained teaching of our modern culture to let ourselves do that.
It really does. And I know for myself, every time I've gone through that mushy DNA, formless, losing stage, it's my biggest struggle. And I'm curious if it's been similar for you, has been all of the external expectations that I've had to, resist of we should be producing, you should be doing, this is how it's supposed to be looking, or you should have this immediate success, or you shouldn't be letting go of these things society tells you to be letting go of. And that process of unbecoming in this culture is not recognized as an essential piece, because we have a very unhealthy way of looking at the world from this, you can call it the patriarchal lens of just keep doing, growing. And that's not the reality of nature. It's not the reality of our bodies. It's not the reality of my own experiences. It sounds like yours either. So has that been a similar process for you, or what were the biggest challenges you faced in letting go?
Those were definitely challenges, and I have a little bit of a rebel soul. So I had a little bit of a like, hey, you want me to do this? So for those of you who are listening and not watching, I made the gesture. So I think that there's always been a piece of me that pushes against societal expectations. And so for me, I think that the hardest thing was the sense of giving up control. Like all the things that I could hold on to were things that I was trying to control. And so here's the secret, y'all. If you're a control freak like me, you have to get on board with the going to soup, because then you're like, oh yeah, I am going to DNA soup. I am unwinding everything and I'm participating. Therefore, it's not out of control because I've chosen to be in this and I'm helping. And that shifts everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in there saying like, oh yeah, I'm in a season of letting go, of unwinding. I'm going to unravel myself. I'm going to join this dance actively instead of having it done to me, instead of feeling like, the world is not behaving the way I wish it would. It really shifts everything. Think about the moment when you acknowledge an energy you've been in for a long time. Like, for instance, if you've been in a relationship that like you just know in your heart is not going to last, you're like, it's not going to last. And you're like, well, but we have kids together, or we have a house together, or I'm too old to find somebody else. And so you tell yourself a story and you hold on and you hold on and you hold on. And then there comes a moment where something happens. Either the other person leaves you or you finally reach a breaking point. And oftentimes the first thing you feel is relief. You're like, oh, okay, there's a lot to handle. There's a lot to do. My heart's a little broken. And that energy has been building and building and building and building. And it's a relief to just acknowledge the elephant in the room. So I think that when we step into the dance of releasing, we get to that relief moment a heck of a lot sooner.
And as you were saying that, I was visualizing when we're holding on, we're clenching, right? There's so much tension and it creates stagnancy because there isn't that natural flow, that natural movement when we try to control, and energetically we're blocking the new from even coming in when we're not willing to let go of what has been.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to highlight is when you said the choice point, because so often we forget, right? We have this choice. And for me, I see choice as that's the empowerment. When we remember, despite the external, despite all of these things, I can choose, right, how to respond. I can choose to be in my power here. I can choose to reclaim and be with my deep truth no matter what. And that choice point, I feel so many of the reasons I haven't made it, or I see, clients or other people around the world not making those choices, not wanting to make them, is fear. They're so afraid, because when we let go of control, well, control is rooted in fear. We only control what we fear. And so when we let go, we're so afraid. And how did you confront these fears or move through these fears or remain in that choice point through what you faced?
I think that when we get up to the edge of the cliff and we're struggling and fighting, eventually we either fall over or get thrown over. There's no control, right? The world is crumbling. The edge of the cliff just crumbles under your feet and off you go. But when you walk up to the cliff and you unfurl your wings or pull out your parachute and jump, that is a choice. You are in your power. You are in control. You're still going over the same cliff, but you're going over in a whole different way. And so for me, when you say, how did I get over that fear? I got over that fear by realizing that I could remain in control of my own life by actively participating and joining in this unraveling. I could take a swan dive over that cliff and whisk out my invisible parachute and go gently gliding down. And that's a moment where something else can happen. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I could enjoy the ride in a way that I would never have if I had just let that cliff crumble and gone crashing.
Mm-hmm. And, when you were choosing to take that leap, right, whether it be through growing the wings or on the parachute, makes me wonder, sometimes, because the question in the mind is, well, what if that falls? What if I start to fly and I fall? Or what if I can't fly? Or what if something happens to the parachute, right? There are always these fears that the mind will always find, right? These fears, these ways to resist the growth and expansion that is really part of our birthright, that is really part of being human unless we stop it. And I'm curious, for me, I feel when I have fallen, when I have taken a leap and I have fallen, because that's happened for me, where I've taken the leap thinking I'm growing wings, and actually I just fell into the depths of even more darkness, right? And I know you talk a lot about like that going into the darkness in your memoir. And maybe falling is actually the medicine. Maybe in those moments, falling is exactly what the soul needs. Falling is the medicine. Falling is what brings the magic. And I'd love for you to share your deepest moment in which you fell and you were in that darkness, how you saw that as part of your medicine and your journey.
So in the book, I talk about these moments where I began having visual hallucinations. I began seeing manifestations of darkness and evil. And, what I did in that moment was I took it to someone wiser than me and said, like, what's going on here? And what was explained to me was, you get to choose how you are going to allow your thoughts and your feelings and the energies that you're sensing to be interpreted by your brain. And so if you want to go down the path of visual hallucinations, go for it. But if you don't, then you need to say to yourself, you know what? This is not okay for me. This is not how I want to experience this energy. And you need to create a different flow channel for it. And so I came up with other channels, other ways of letting that type of energy move through me. Because basically what's happening is you're sensing something out in the world. Your brain is turning it into a pattern that it can recognize and you can recognize. If you're a visual person, seeing things is, part of like the language that your brain is very good at. And so you might see things in a dream, you might see things in a daydream or on like a mystical journey or in meditation, or you might start having visual hallucinations. Now, obviously, if you're having visual hallucinations because of a chemical imbalance in your body, what I'm saying is not going to apply. But if you're channeling a lot of energy and it's coming out as kind of those visual hallucinations, you can redirect that energy. And so I do a lot of like writing and burning, like just getting the crap out and throwing the piece of paper in the fire. More than anything else, I think I need to acknowledge when I'm running a lot of energy, like when the world's coming at me fast and hard. I need to acknowledge that and find a way. And it can be so simple. I can like plant my feet on the ground and envision sending it down to the earth. It doesn't have to be some great big thing. It's more acknowledging to yourself that this is happening. And here's where I want all this excess input, because really that's all it is. It's just input. Here's where I want it to go.
What I really hear in what you're saying, which is so magical, and it connects to magic, is we don't have to do it all alone, and we don't have to hold it, because you talked about, burning and giving it to the fire or releasing it down to the earth. Another could be cleansing in the river or taking a shower and using the water or breathing in fresh air or doing breath work or movement, right? So to move the energy and that orchestration and working with the elements is magic, is how we start to attune to magic. And I'd love to talk a little more specifically about that connection between the elements and magic, because you're also an herbalist and have written a lot about herbs, and that's another part of how we work with the elements and magic. So I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, the elements are one of the oldest tools, I think, in our magical toolbox. The history of the elements is kind of fascinating, and I go into it in my last book, The Night School. But this comes from the ancient Greek philosophers who were sitting around trying to figure out what the universe was made of. What were the building blocks of the universe? And they tried all different things. And they finally came to the conclusion that these 4 elements were the building blocks of the universe. And sometimes throughout history, there's simultaneous discovery in different places. So you have the Greeks talking about the 4 elements. And then in Asia, you have what became traditional Chinese medicine, talking about 5 elements. In Ayurvedic medicine, you have the 3 doshas, which are based on 5 elements. So there was this simultaneous discovery going on around the world. And I'm sure that other cultures could be tracked into this, where like everyone was asking, what are we humans made of? What's the universe made of? And how do those 2 things interact with each other? So all your early medicine was based on these theories of the elements within you becoming out of balance, or the elements without you affecting the elements within you, right? So, when we say we have a cold, the whole reason we say we have a cold is because it used to be thought that the cold, literally cold air, the element of air when it was cold. And if you study Chinese medicine, the element of wind, which is also a form of air, would blow into you and it would chill you and you'd get all cold. So, the roots of some of our naming of things goes back to these elements. And if you know chemistry, you know that earth, air, water, and fire are not part of the periodic table. We have gotten rid of this idea that the four elements are the building blocks of all things. And yet they hold our romantic minds in a way that like an atom doesn't, So when you're thinking magically, sometimes tuning into the elements is a great way to begin, or a great way to enhance where you're going. Like, what's the balance of the elements in a situation? If you're screaming at a friend, what elements are present? Fire, passion, the screaming, the air blowing through your vocal cords. So if you need to calm yourself down, you could go to the opposite elements, earth and water. And if you just think about this logically, if you're in a tizzy, you might go take a bath. You might go stand outside and just breathe with the trees a little bit. Like, these are things that we do naturally to calm us down. So I love working with the elements because I feel like it gives us a chance to infuse a little bit of magic into very everyday situations. You don't think of having a fight with a friend as something magical or something that you can infuse with magic. But when you start to look at the elemental implications of what's going on, you can then see how you can bring a little bit of magic into this moment to transform it into something else.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm really passionate about is this split we've created between spirit and matter, which is really what I hear you saying. And then in ancient times, it was recognized, it was understood that there was no split, that spirit was contained in matter. All matter contains spirit, whether that be human, like the person containing spirit, soul within, whether that be a plant, an herb growing, whether it be the elements themselves, they were all recognized as divine. And this split really separated us from the magic of the natural world.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you talk in your book release the other day around something you also share in your book, this questioning of, when the split took place, this one male god was put in the sky instead. And we were told, well, no, this is the God, and spirit is only up and out of the earth. Spirit is out of the body. Spirit was also deemed out of woman at the same exact time. And struggling against this worldview that we've had collectively, regardless of our individual disagreement, we've had collectively for 5,000+ years. What was your way of growing up in a Hebrew school, growing up in a Jewish family? What was your way of separating from this worldview? I know this is a big question, maybe even just a small, shorter answer. It's probably quite complex, but separating from this worldview and coming into that reconnection to magic in nature.
Yeah. So, this was a decades-long process for me. Excuse me. I had to separate first. I really had to kind of just snip the cord and sever myself from organized religion. And for many, many years, I said, I'm an atheist. And I think in terms of the way the organized religions treat God, I'm still an atheist. In terms of the way people who are perhaps spiritual but not religious treat the word God, then I'm not an atheist. But I had to put down this concept of a male figure in the heavens, judging me, smiting, that just frankly wasn't something I was interested in. And it made me very angry at religion in general. It doesn't take much of a knowledge of history to see the role of religion in every major world conflict we've ever had. So for an institution that is supposed to promote love and peace, it's promoted an awful lot of hate. Mm-hmm. So my first step was really disconnection. Like, just, I am unplugging from that. That is not me. That is not okay. That is something that I think that, like, the best way to say it is I'm disappointed in, like, I felt like there was a promise there, and a promise that I desperately wanted. I wanted a spiritual life. I wanted to feel a life of the soul. And I did not find that in the Jewish faith of my childhood. So the first thing was just disconnect. And then from disconnect, over a long period of time, I began to find what I did believe in, like where I could put my faith. And one of the things I still feel very strongly about is I am a creature of language. I'm a writer, and I don't feel like we can give each other divine words. The whole liturgy, the prayer book, that's one person's, or prayers are often written by different people, so a conglomeration of people, but each prayer is one person's praise for what they see as divine. And their words are not going to work for me. In fact, my own words from yesterday are not going to work for me today. I think that part of how I define divinity is creativity. There's that, like, spark of creation. And so part of how I can participate in that and be in awe and joy of that is to also be creating. Like, so to be creating in the moment, the words of love and praise and prayer is part of how I can feel a sense of that awe and divinity. And, from that place of kind of creating my own practices, creating my own, I don't even want to call it a belief system, because I don't think there's any system to it. It's pretty loosey-goosey. But from there, I could then look back at religion, not just the one I grew up with, but all religion, from a much less angry place. And from a place where, I could see that, like, if other people were getting the feeling that I was getting from my self-created practice, from religion, then I could kind of see why they were in. Because it's something we need as humans. We need that sense of there being something beyond us, and once I got to that place, then I could look back and really see what's beautiful in all the different forms of practice and faith that we have found for ourselves over the years. I still think that they get distorted and used in ways that are not true to their core principles. But, doesn't that happen to all of us, truthfully?
Yeah. And one of the things you shared is we have to, we would want to, so many of us, connect to something beyond ourselves, to connect to something larger than just this physical form we find ourselves in, or this limited mind, but something so much bigger, something so much more magical, something so much more special. And coming into that, for me, I see the heart as the portal to that. The heart is the bridge to the other world. The heart is the bridge to the world around us, that point of union. The heart is union. And as we connect to that natural world, we connect to the magic within and without, all around us, because it is that union, that communion with something beyond ourselves that creates and is the living magic. And as we wrap up today, I'm this letting magic in, a memoir of becoming. I would love to know, because so much of what you shared is in more depth in the book, but beyond that, why would somebody pick up this book? What do you want the reader to receive from the sharing of your story?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fabulous question. I really hope to lay a breadcrumb trail for someone who's on a mystical path that isn't sure where they're going. And you're not going to go where I went, but it's nice to see some signposts, along the way. And I truly believe, having seen so many people walk through their own spiritual doorways, that the signposts are often the same or similar enough that we can learn something from each other's journeys. The specifics are going to be totally different. So you just have to, not try to take the specifics on as something that's going to relate to you in particular, but the larger guideposts, you're going to see resonance with your own path and your own journey. It took me many years to be able to write this book. This is my 6th book. I had to teach myself to write well enough to be able to write this book. And so, I really hope that through all the other pieces of writing that I've done in the past decade, I've gotten to a way of languaging that is relatable for someone else. I think oftentimes in the beginning, when we first start writing, we're writing for ourselves, and it takes a while to turn it into a communicative skill where we're really able to write for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate. I think on my own book, I was writing for myself for at least, the first several years. And it was a completely different process to then write for another person and to bring that forth. Because in the sharing of your story, there is so much wisdom that the reader can receive and take in and let deliver its own magic just through the reading of the words. And there's also magic in knowing that you're not on this path alone, and others have walked this, and there's a way out that your unique soul is going to bring you to. And I feel like your book is a guide for those that are on this mystical path of seeking magic to really claim that this is a worthy path, that the path has blessings that go beyond what we might be able to see with our physical mind, into a deepening of who we really are, which is priceless.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's what we're all looking for, that feeling of just being able to settle and ground into ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It is the key to everything. Everything in our life is based on this inner relationship. Everything. So where can people find your book? Where can they find you?
You can find the book wherever books are sold. So that's easy. And you can find me on my website, which is just my name, MaiaToll.com.
Beautiful. And we'll put a link in the show notes so that you can find the book, find Maia, and Letting Magic In, a Memoir of Becoming. Check it out. And it's a page turner. You're really going to love it. It's beautiful writing. So thank you so much, Maia, for being here today, for sharing your wisdom, your time, your magic with our audience. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Bye to you all.